So,
I mean, because again, a lot of the reason why I like having the opportunity to discuss the making of games is because I've never made one, and especially when I come across a game like yours where the difference in its upfront presentation is so stark compared to a lot of games, because it's it's so striking to just look at and watch play out. And then when you get into the midst of the game, the level of detail and the level of the complexity of the game. Because I know you're into your board games, so it probably isn't complex to you. But someone like me, who's a novice at it, is like,
sure.
Wow, there's so much to kind of digest here. It's interesting to me to see how it goes all together. So, like I say, the reason I ask you if you're happy at how it came together is because, as a content creator, I often look at things from the outlook of, well, how does it compare to how I set out to make the thing that I made?
Sure.
And sometimes I feel, I could have done better, or do you know what? I had no idea it was going to turn out this good. Do you think it turned out as good as you wanted it to be, or do you still want to tinker with it, or is it like, look, nah, it's done. I'm pleased with it. It's now on to the next thing.
I definitely still want to tinker with it. I think as a straight card game conversion, originally I wanted to just because DragonClash began as a physical card game, which I published via Kickstarter. It was a successful Kickstarter, and so my original intent was simply to convert it from physical tabletop to digital form, just so I could more easily pick up and play with it. From a selfish perspective, I wanted to do I just wanted to be able to play with it, whenever I wanted to as a solo player. So yeah, as a straight digital conversion, I think it went over really well. What I'm kind of looking at now is how to best expand on that card game, and in terms of, and that's kind of going in with the boss battles, which are kind of almost like puzzle elements in a way, and just some other features I'm hoping to get in. I would like to do a story mode. I don't know if that's going to come together or not, but I have a lot of ideas. We'll see. Obviously ideas take resources, so we'll see how many of those actually make it into the final product. But yeah, I'm generally happy with it as a straight conversion of the game. I think it's technically sound. I think it's fun to play. Just from of course I'm biased, but I kind of expected the level of complexity you're mentioning. I kind of knew, just it's coming from a new player coming into the game. It's not, there's no tutorial yet. There is a pretty 10-12 page rule book, so there's a steep learning curve, and that's something I knew that would be a challenge for me to overcome, just from a developer's perspective. So there's still that element I need to tackle, but overall, yeah, I think it's come along.
Let me just touch on that, because again, I come across this in my own content quite a lot, where people will come to me and they'll say, yeah, I mean, I like it, but I mean, could you maybe do this instead, or could you maybe tweak it to do this? And I got to be honest with you, a lot of the time I want to go, no, and they go, well, why not? Why wouldn't you target to me? Well, because no offense, but creatively, that doesn't sound very fulfilling or interesting. Like, I want to craft this thing, and I want it to find its own audience its own way. I don't really want to bend it to the will of somebody else who really isn't all that invested to begin with, because no offense, your opinion is going to be different from the next person and the next person and the next person. So
absolutely.
Is there an incentive for you there, do you think, to kind of skew it more towards, I don't want to say a casual audience, I think that's demeaning, but maybe more towards an audience that's as unfamiliar to this type of game? Or is it a question of saying, no, actually, I'm experienced in this kind of genre, and I knew the kind of game that would be fun to play, would be gratifying to play, and have a degree of longevity to it, rather than crafting it for the kind of person that's just going to play it maybe once or twice and then put it down, sort of thing.
Sure. I mean, that's absolutely. I mean, isn't that why I think as an indie in general, it's why it's not only to pursue a dream, but it's to make the game you want to make. So yeah, absolutely. I try to probably lean more towards the latter there, but recognizing it's also a difference in platforms as well, because expectations. Because you have an expectation when you're designing a board game or a card game, a physical card game, that generally people sit down, at least scan the rules, and before playing. Whereas a computer gamer, the tutorials, the rules, they generally just ignore it and just dive in, assuming either the game is going to it's going to hold their hand for a little bit, or they'll just figure it out. So it's also just me adjusting to, I think, the expectations of the platform. But as a game, I definitely, I mean, DragonClash is very different from your typical digital card game, which is probably one of the challenges I have in terms of just marketing it, because I think the audience for a card game generally has expectations of what a digital card game should be, primarily as a deck builder, and DragonClash definitely is not that, and that was intentional. I didn't want to do another deck builder. I wanted a game where I could pick up and play more like a fighting game but with cards. You pick your favorite dragon with their own personality, their own strategy, their own look, and you just throw it up against another dragon, and you eventually fight some bosses, and then you can kind of continue that loop. So I looked at it more that way, trying to carve out my own little niche, which I think could be a positive and a negative, because again, you go against kind of the expectations of the genre, but at the same time, you do have that difference to stand out. So it's to that specific audience anyway.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if I answered your question or not.
No, it does, because again, a lot of people have commented on the sort of stuff I make, in the sense of you tend to fly in the face of things a bit too much, and that's how this kind of conversation comes about. A lot of people go, well, what's the necessity of having this conversation? I go, well, number one, because I don't see a lot of it. Number two, I find it interesting. Yeah. And that's, I feel like if I find it interesting, or if I find some worth to it, then I'm going to put more effort into it, and I'm going to make it better. The idea that you would craft a game from the ground up to sort of fill your own niche that you've identified is kind of the point of entrepreneurship in the first place. Is you going, I like card games and I like digital card games, but there's something lacking in it. And if you've got the skill and the ability to be able to put it into to build it to fruition, I think that's really impressive. I mean, because I've been playing the game on and off for a few months, obviously because of this conversation. I've had to put off the review because I've wanted to give it as fair a shake as possible. Also, I've wanted to win a game. That would be great at one point. Not a comment on the game, just I'm terrible. I'm always the brawler in every game I always play, so that tells you something about my strategy ability. But what's always struck me about the game is, again, the level of production that gone into the game, the level of depth there is to the game. There's a lot of passion in it, and it's impossible to ignore. So
I appreciate that. Thank you.
No. So, hey, listen, I'm just calling it how I sees it. And when I come to review it, I'm going to have to find an angle to approach it where I can illustrate that point as clearly as possible. Because I feel like a lot of indie games don't get that rub. They get the, cute idea. It's like, hang on a second. Look, you don't know how long has gone into making this thing. And the trial and error that goes into it. So one of the questions that I knew I was going to ask you at some stage is, what was one of the challenges? Because I think it's a good question to ask, but it's tricky because I would imagine putting together a game like this has a series of them, and they're not always in sort of, they don't get bigger or smaller as they go. They kind of go little, big, small, little, as it goes. Sort of thing.
Well, it also depends what element of it you're speaking to, because as an indie, I mean, I'm sure you face the same thing. You kind of have to wear all the hats.
Indeed,
right? So,
yeah, 100%.
There's development challenges, marketing challenges, all kinds of things you have to kind of weigh and face, and hopefully overcome. And you do the best you can as an indie. But I guess in terms of what you speaking to specifically, development challenges, or what were you?
Well, even if you want to go back to concept, I mean, what inspired it originally, as far as the look and the feel of the game? Because I know you probably told me this. Did you develop it from the card game, or was the card game developed in tandem, or did that come afterwards in terms of the design of it all?
So it's actually got about a 20-year history. DragonClash started as a tabletop kind of RPG that I wrote shortly after college. Dating myself here, but back in 1999 or so, and I self-published it in 2001, and it kind of gained a small but devoted audience in some strange places. I had a fan club in Australia, of all places, off of that game, but it didn't, overall, it was, my first publication ever. Didn't really sell to, didn't warrant any follow up, unfortunately.
Okay.
But it did have enough of an audience where I kind of, it was always something kind of in the back of my head anyway. This game world in general has always kind of been with me. And then in 2005, I started working I had been working as a web developer, and I realized I could take some of those skills I had gained as a web developer and kind of create an online version of the game, to play in your web browser. And so that actually ended up hiring a bunch of artists, which I quickly learned you have to do, because after trying to self-publish my own things, I realized, I need help with the art. you find help with where your weaknesses are, and that was definitely mine. And I released that in 2006, I think, as an online game, and that actually went really well. I actually did a expansion in 2007. It actually did so well in terms of just audience, not necessarily in terms of income, because people go to these browser games expecting them to be free, of course. But in terms of audience, it was very successful, and it was almost as an indie developer, a solo indie developer, I just didn't have the technical know-how in terms of the server capacity and that kind of thing for an online game. So I had to eventually table that. I had to eventually close it down simply because I just couldn't keep up with the traffic, the internet traffic. It was just crashing my site constantly. So yeah, again, that was, and then that kind of, again, it was kind of marinating in my head for a while. And then 2013, I did the card game on Kickstarter because I wanted to again find a way to be able to pick up and play in that game world. Sit down with a quick play session, whatever, an hour play session with somebody, play a couple games, and then have that experience. And that did well on Kickstarter, at least it funded, and then I wanted to bring it back to the computer. Then I picked up some additional tools. So in terms of skill set, I kind of got into the whole Unity development, and I realized, hey, well, why not try to convert this card game into Unity and publish it as an actual computer game. So in terms of challenges, that it was just kind of the natural evolution of the game from format to format, adapting it. This being pretty much my first foray into Unity development, came with a whole new challenges for that. It's funny, I didn't think about it at the time, but a card game might have been a bad choice for a first foray into it, just because of the amount of, you don't think about it, but you have 10 cards in your hand, right?
Yes.
In this game, and you have to animate the card going from each position, each of those 10 places,
right, okay,
to like a discard pile, or to or to the attack slot. There's 5 attack slots. So you think about it, how much that multiplies really quickly. I had, weeks where I was just literally animating a card a card image to go 6 inches, but I had to do it 10 times. It's just exponential. It's just little things like that you just don't think about when you're diving into the game, but then when you're in it, you're like, what the hell? What was I thinking? So it's all kind of little funny challenges like that I had to overcome, and just it's something as a player you're just like, okay, the card's moving, great. But as a developer, man, that took me. To get those animations, it took weeks.
Yeah, can certainly speak to that. There's been a million times where I thought, hey, this would be fun as a video series, and you go, oh wait, but I'd have to do this every time.
Yeah.
Nah, not worth it. But once you've like you've just said, once you've set your stall up in terms of an idea or a genre of a game, and this is kind of expected of it, that is that at that point it's kind of tricky to backpedal from that decision, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so that, it's just learning the software from a technical level, mastering the software from a creative level, and then just being able to, you have to adapt the game, obviously, because you can't just do a one-for-one transfer. It has to be, you have to take into account the format people are playing in, just from a UI level, from a balance level, and so the game actually changed quite a bit, more than I thought it would, from the tabletop medium to the digital medium, and part of that, and this is actually a benefit I didn't realize at the time, is I just able to play so many more games on the digital level. Like I can play hundreds of games, just myself, and get that feedback and realize, oh wait, this is not working, this is working, and tweak it immediately and get feedback, play it again and get immediate feedback. Whereas on a tabletop, you have to schedule play sessions, you have to organize it, you have to teach people the game, and that might only be a handful of people, for a specific rule set, and then you tweak the rule set, you got to do it all over again. So you get so much more play test opportunity, at least for me, doing on digital first. Whereas I think if I ever release the card game as a tabletop product again, based on these revised rules, I think it'll be so much stronger because just what the evolution of the game has gone through, in the short year plus development cycle it's been on. So that's been an interesting benefit / challenge as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you think the game is where you want it to be in terms of how fun you thought it was going to be from the start, or have you improved it? I mean, is there any aspect of the game that, I mean, like you say, initially at least it was to enable you to be able to pick up and play immediately. Has that fed into the speed of the gameplay, and has that speed improved your fun with the game, and how much fun you think people are going to have with it?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I definitely looked at. I found actually initially when I did a 1-for-1 conversion, games were taking too long. I thought some of the because in this game, for people who don't know, you develop your own dragon, of course, and I thought that process was actually a little slow. People weren't getting to play their cool attacks fast enough. So I did a lot of I kind of stepped back and did a lot of redesign on those elements. From a presentation standpoint as well, I just wanted to, make sure that you were relaying, of course, what was happening in a productive and efficient manner, so people understood what was happening. Like you said, there's a lot going on, and that's something I'm continually looking at in terms of just UI design. That's not totally there. One of the funny things we talked about, of course, is the whole menu debacle that people seem to have.
Oh, dear me! The cornerstone of any great online gaming podcast, we have to talk about the menus at some point, because people lose their collective shit whenever we talk about the goddamn menus. Fill me in, because every developer so far, every single one, without fail, has always said, no, I don't really receive any negative feedback that's hard to understand. And then I go, well, what about the menus? Oh, fuck, yeah, the menus. Yeah, I forgot about that. It's like, so... Because when I gave you that, and I was saying, look, I'm struggling with this a little bit, it was literally only because I'm not used to a card-playing game. Once I got the hang of it, and I have got the hang of it now, it's the easiest thing in the world to play. It couldn't be simpler now that I understand how it's set ergonomically. But let's say, for the sake of argument, you're getting feedback from people. Like, how, as a developer who's focusing on just making the most fun game possible, how helpful is that feedback really, do you think?
I was shocked. But first of all, let me say that comment you made was super valuable to me, because as a developer, you just, your head's in it, how to play it, you know how things are supposed to work. And something as simple as that, as simple as, how do I start the damn game? you don't even think about that. But it was super helpful, because I look at it now, I'm like, oh yeah, obviously I needed to simply put a prompt there, start the game by pressing this button or whatever it is. And it's funny how like little things like that, it just seems so obvious, can just escape a developer who's looking at it from a very macro level. But anyway, to your question, yeah, I mean, I was surprised about that comment. I kind of expected, game is too hard, there's no tutorial, I don't know what to do. It doesn't show dragons fighting. They probably thought people might want to see, the animations of dragons swooping in and that kind of thing. Or
I imagine
there's no multiplayer, that kind of thing.
That was one of the things I just thought. You know what? Because I appreciated that from an animation standpoint. That would be an utter chore to do. Because I've played a few RPGs in review, and every single one of them has negated having that animation, because it's just too. They don't have a department bespoke for that. So it's kind of hard to animate every single attack, or every variation of every single attack, back and front, increased, small, So that was never going to be a criticism on mine. But I was going to ask you at some point, have people criticised the game for that, which we'll come to in a minute. But as far as the menus are concerned, sorry.
Yeah, so those are the kind of things I was expecting, and Partially maybe because they were my own criticism. Like, you kind of criticize your own game. You realize where things might be lacking in your own game. But I was totally unprepared for people nitpicking the menus, at least for an early access title. It's openly early access. And clearly it's not even content finished at this point. And people, rather than saying, "Hey, I couldn't," there's only 2 dragons to play. At the time I got the comment, it was, the menus look horrible, and I was just surprised. For me, at this point, menus are meant to be functional. They're not meant to, the options menu seems to be the least important aspect to me, but I guess it's important to people. I didn't realize that. So, going through the UI and making it prettier is definitely on the list, but it's kind of probably the last thing I'll look at, as opposed to putting more content in, or making sure the attacks are balanced, or putting more music in, or that kind of thing.
If it makes you feel any better, I have a theory on that criticism, and I'll share it with you. But my question to you is, why do you think? And it is by far and away the most common criticism I see of games beyond graphics. That's usually the first thing, is like, oh, it looks terrible. Then they go, the menus, and then they start talking about the gameplay. Why would you think that the menus seem to be synonymous with someone who likes to point that out to specifically developers, but also they tend to warn other users of the lack of ergonomic dynamicism, I think I saw someone wrote at one point, which is just another way of saying, hey, the menu's not easy to navigate.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's the first thing a player experiences, right? So maybe that's part of it. Is before they even get into the game, they have to navigate the menus. So I suppose if that's their first impression of the game, so be it. I guess that's maybe where it's coming from. And of course, I think indie games in general, just necessity, that kind of thing tends to come last, because that stuff can change anyway so many times during a. It's kind of pointless to have the perfect options menu up when your options are still being constructed.
Exactly.
So I imagine it's probably it's probably an easy thing to point to, an easy thing to nitpick, because it's also your first impression. Maybe I don't know. It's a good question. I hadn't really thought about it other than being a little bit surprised. It kind of goes back to what you're saying about making the game you want to make too. It's one of those things where it's like, well, it is what it is. I'm sorry, you probably have to deal with it for a while until, and I will look at it. I will look at it later. But
I mean, I got to be honest with you. My theory is probably a little bit more simple. It's literally they want to have an opinion on something before they've really formed it, and the most demonstratively easy thing to point out is whether or not a menu functions properly.
Yeah.
As opposed to, because I've learnt this in playing your game, the reason why your review has taken so long is because I want to fully experience the game as much as I can, but I don't want to criticise my own failings at the game as your failings of the game. Do you see what I mean?
Sure,
so
absolutely.
My inability to harness the game shouldn't be to your detriment. If you build a game your way, it's kind of incumbent upon me to learn how to play your game. It's the same reason why if a kid brought a ball to the playground, it was his rules. And if he didn't want to play the game, well, he'd take the ball and go home, and you wouldn't play the game anymore. So it's not a question of, well, no, we play the rules this way. The kid with the ball makes the rules. It's your ball. You make the rules. So I think that people have this weird notion that they can criticize the formulation of the menu screens, or the menus in general, because it's the easiest thing to point to as being broken or lacking perhaps in smooth function, without getting into the gameplay as deeply as they perhaps should. It makes the menu thing seem like nothing. I can't tell you how many games I've played with a menu screen. Yeah, maybe it's a little jagged, or it's a little clunky. Okay, but it's the last thing I think about because I'm playing a sweet game. Yours is a great example of that. When I got into playing the game, a lot of the stuff that you kind of highlight, which is the thing you might interact with first, you just get through to get to the game. And then when you're in the midst of it, you're just thinking about, what card do I play next? How do I progress this next turn? What cards do I discard? and you're just thinking about all these different things to try and win. That's all. It becomes all consuming. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I was more involved in. That's why I was surprised to get that. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense what you're saying. And I think there is something to that where it's easy. It's an easy thing to look at, and both as a first impression and because it's right in front of your face. It doesn't require any investment of time. It's just it doesn't look pretty.
And you've hit the nail on the head. It doesn't. I couldn't have phrased it better myself. It doesn't require any investment in time to make that criticism. But I feel like with indie games specifically, I don't see this criticism leveled at many sort of. I don't like calling them AAA because I feel like that's a weird. Because then you're kind of lumping everything in. But the games you see on shelves at your local Walmart or Tesco or wherever.
Yeah.
Those games just get criticised as to whether or not they're fun. That's it.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Whereas indie games have to have this extra scrutiny, which is weird because a lot of indie games are typically priced significantly cheaper.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that to you, I mean, I don't want to say how many hundreds or thousands of hours that you've invested into the game, but I would imagine it's a significant portion of your time.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. If you were to be compensated commensurate to what you would do as as your normal vocation or another vocation, I'm sure that would be pretty expensive.
Yeah, it's it's depressing to think about when you put it like that. But yeah, you do it out of love, and yeah, absolutely.
You do, 100%. Yeah, you're speaking to a YouTuber who is still trying to make his way. I haven't seen a single red cent from my work on YouTube, and I'm going for 3.5 years now.
Yeah,
you're in good company when it comes to the fact that hey, I think I make a good product. I think I make a good presentation. Maybe ease up on the criticism of, I'm not a big fan of the title screen. It goes on for 10 seconds, and I'd prefer it to be 6.
It's a strange thing where indie games have to somehow make themselves not look like they're indie, but
Yes.
as if it's some like dirty little word. It's like you have to not look indie to be acceptable. It's strange. I think indie games in a way, those rough edges can actually be a cool thing. I think it kind of gives them personality. But yeah, good points.
No, I agree. I mean, the other question I have for you is in terms of the development of this game in particular.
Yeah.
When it came to structuring the gameplay versus how you would play in real life, either with real cards.
Yep.
Were there any concessions you had to make for the sake of gameplay that, in hindsight, you wish you'd have tried to implement or integrate more? So. You mentioned the speed of play is increased.
Yeah.
Is there any other mechanic you would have wanted to implement to allow players to take their time a little bit more if they want longer play sessions, or in terms of different modes or inhibitions, or anything that you could apply to a card game that you currently can't apply to the digital version, or is it all encompassing anyway?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, in terms of differences in the medium, I think it's actually been the other way around. It's interesting. I think I mean, a lot of times you can do more because when you're on a digital platform, you can deal with numbers a little differently. When you're on a tabletop, it's got to be the math has to be simple. You can't have people sitting there trying to figure out multiplication while they're trying to play. But when you're on a digital platform, you can do a lot of those. So things like random events might happen, and that was one thing I added. Now the event cards, for example, in the digital game, they only last for 10 turns, so there's a counter on them. But in the tabletop, you just play them and they're just out until they were replaced by a different event card. So there are certain things where the game can keep track of stuff better, for you on the digital platform, whereas it might become clunky on the physical, having counters all over the place. And a lot of games do that, of course. There are plenty of games that have plenty of counters and dice and things that you think about. But from a simplicity standpoint, I think you can kind of streamline things a little bit better on the digital platform, just because the computer is there to help you. That's probably the biggest difference, I would say.
What was the differences in the creative process in making the game versus, for instance, writing a book or devising a card game? I mean, what are the challenges where okay, how do you go about your creative process differently? Do you start from a idea at the end, so to speak, in terms of ultimately I want the game to play out like this, or do you start with a premise of I want, to your point, I want to take a tabletop card game and I want to streamline it to a certain degree so I can play it, multiple games in the same time it would have taken me to even organize one. What are some
Yeah.
of the differences in how you would approach that creatively? Do you have any thoughts on that, or is it all of your creative endeavors, broadly speaking, starting the same way?
It definitely starts with a premise. You have to, at least for me, I have to have an idea that I'm excited about, and it, in this case, it came from the game, the game world itself. It's something I've kind of been, as I said, it's been marinating with me for 20 odd years, and it's just kind of exploring how I wanted to interact with that game world. In this case, it was wanting to focus on at least it started as an intended physical card game, wanting something tangible. I had done the online thing, but I wanted to sit down, have those physical cards, have that physical representation of your dragon, and be able to grow it over time. I thought that was kind of a cool aspect where your dragon would change and you can customize it, but not over like a long period of time like an RPG, but in a single game session, your dragon would be. You play two of the same decks, your dragon would be different than the other person's dragon.
Sure.
And so, from that standpoint, there were certain, from a premise standpoint, I guess that's where it started. You come up with little ideas or little nuggets that you like, that excite you, and then you kind of see how those fit in to a larger picture. And that's probably how it germinated.
I mean,
anyway.
I guess to get to another, because you have to forgive me, I do sometimes struggle to articulate the thought that's in my head. The question, I guess, stems from the idea of filtration, because at least what I've found is, in my own endeavours, sometimes you have an idea, and you want to explore every avenue of that idea, even though a lot of it is wasted time, or it's not actually productive to creating the best product that you can. So, in something like DragonClash, where the temptation is to build something again that has a faster pace, shall we say?
Yep.
But you still want to offer enough diversity and enough to the game where the tactics can play out in real time, and you can exchange, go back and forth, gain an advantage, lose it, or become masterful at the game. Is it hard hemming those ideas in? Because I would imagine, just based on having played the game and the different variations and the number of different tactics and the number of different avenues that you can explore when playing the game, it must have been difficult keeping that limited. Because, I mean, obviously not from an animation standpoint, you were probably begging them to stop. But at the same time, it's one of those things where you go, oh, wouldn't it be great if I could add this? Oh, wouldn't it be great if we added this in? Or what if we explore this? And it's like, hang on, if we add all this in, suddenly the game isn't actually all that streamlined anymore. So was that difficult?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you're talking about feature creep, essentially, right? So it sounds like, and I mean, that's definitely a thing you're constantly challenged with. You have all these ideas. I mean, I wanted to at one point have part of the game world is having, it's dragons interacting with humans. Like that's kind of part of the game world, and you don't really have that human element in the game yet. I wanted the dragons to fight human military units, dragon hunters, that kind of thing, whether it be a boss battle or in part of the game itself. So, I mean, that's just an example of something that was way out of scope, and I kind of had to reel in and just focus on this particular battle among dragons, and kind of hint at it. You see the cards like Slayers, for example. I don't know if that's come up in your game sessions, where you see the military units fighting the dragons. You kind of have to get some of the game world through the cards, through the art. And I try to reveal it that way. But there's definitely a ton I could do, from a story aspect, from a features aspect. Yeah, there's lots of stuff that you kind of want to do, but you do have to reel it back. And even partly on a design level, partly on a technical level as well. There's just in terms of processes and stages from that you play in the game. Certain things, how the cards interact with each other. It might not, and the features might not simply work from a technical perspective, within the game, whereas as a RPG it might. So it's just there's all kinds of various considerations you definitely have to do with the feature creep for sure.
I mean, as I was playing, I just kept on getting instances of, do you know what? I bet this would have been something he would have, because I have it too. I have a million different ideas sometimes where I go, oh wait, stop the presses. We need to do this.
Yeah.
And then you go, hang on, no, rein it in, because if we do that, then we've got to do this. I mean, to give you an example, at one point I had the idea of doing a weekly news show. Like I would do a daily, and the idea was simple. I'll do 5 minutes a day. That way it adds up to 25 minutes. I'll do that once a week. Easy.
Yeah.
Simple, right? All I need to do is watch the news once a day. Really simple. But then I've got to write jokes every day. I've got to edit every day. I've got to piece it together so it makes sense at the end of the week. And then I've got to release it every single week. It's like, when am I going to get time to play goddamn games for reviews?
Yeah.
It's never going to happen.
Yeah.
So I would imagine in developing a game like this, that you referenced it there, it must be difficult because it's, I mean, in doing my research, not at all creepy amount, just the right amount of research on one person to another, not at all weird. Promise. It's just cropped up again and again that you have a tremendous amount of creativity about you, and I would imagine that can be as much of a benefit as it is a hindrance when it comes to making something along the, because then, I don't know, I guess it's just from my own experience, you do become somewhat distracted by the possibilities rather than getting it over the line in terms of, oh wait, no, it's done. It's ready.
Yeah.
It's perfect. It works how it does now. It doesn't need any more.
Yeah. I mean, for sure. Everything from cutscenes to more dragon animations to God, I could just go on. There's so much that you want to do, but I mean that goes with anything. Whether you're writing a book or painting a picture, I think it's just like eventually you have to say done, but you're never quite satisfied. I don't know if I've as an artist, I don't know if I'm ever totally satisfied with what I put out. But eventually, you have to stop tinkering with it and birth the baby, so to speak. So,
we all got deadlines to meet.
Yeah. So I mean, you kind of try to focus on the most important aspects, sand down the edges, and and kind of in that particular window, develop it as fully as possible, and then you have to see where it lands. I guess see how it impacts people. But yeah.
Now that the game's fully realised, or as realised as it is for the moment,
yeah.
What are the challenges for you now to help the game grow in terms of popularity is probably the wrong word, but in terms of its exposure? Because you and I had a conversation prior to this, via Twitter. We've been talking back and forth, and I, suggested a few things. You said, "Look, I've already done those things, and I don't know how effective they would be, even if I were to redo them." So, as an indie developer, what are the main challenges for you in terms of making this a true success, would you say?
Oof, yeah, that is the $1 million question for me, especially. I mentioned you have to wear a lot of hats as an indie, and the business marketing aspect is probably my hardest challenge as an indie developer to kind of tackle. It's just it's a monster because I think, well, first of all, as an indie, naturally your resources are going to be pretty low. So you have the traditional, in terms of just getting it out there, you don't have that traditional, advertising budget. You're not going to go and buy a bunch of ads typically. I mean, I'm sure some indies do, of course. But, I think more indies rely on social media marketing and that kind of thing. And that comes with its own challenges. I mean, I think there's this idea that ad-based marketing costs something, and more guerrilla marketing, social media marketing is free, and it's definitely not. It's a huge cost that's just as prohibitive, if not more so, in my opinion. And that cost is time.
Yes.
And it takes an incredible amount of time and effort to build a social presence to get the game out there. To run those streams when only 2 or 3 people are watching, to plan, record, and edit your YouTube videos when you only might get a dozen views. It takes a lot of, to join Reddit and Discord and Facebook and Twitter and kind of build an online presence without being spammy about it. It's a huge amount of time investment, and it's something where, for me personally, I could be head down in development or testing. And so, if I have 5 hours to spend on something, and I'm spending 4 hours developing something, and I'm an hour doing social media marketing, it's a hurdle for me, like a mental block, where to me it just feels like that hour is a waste of time. Like, it doesn't feel like it's work. It just feels like you're diddling around online, when in fact you're not. You're building that online presence, but it's a challenge because just from, at least for me again, DragonClash is in a niche market anyway, card games. There's a limited audience. In that market, there are some 10-ton gorillas that I'm up against, including Magic the Gathering and Hearthstone. And it's so competitive that some huge companies that have tried to break into specifically the digital card market, I'm speaking specifically that I can think about is Valve. They published a card game called Artifact, and I think developed by Richard Garfield, no less, who's like the developer of Magic the Gathering. So he's a huge name in the industry, and the game was largely, at least in my understanding, considered a disappointment. So you're an indie game kind of going up against that to begin with. And then I mentioned, it's not a traditional card game anyway, where you might not meet the expectations of a typical deck builder. So I've kind of, looking back at it, I've built up quite a few hurdles I'm going to have to overcome to get the game out there, and just kind of work on building that presence. It's not something I've told. Obviously, that's not something I've mastered by any means. So I'm working on it.
Okay, well this actually might lead into an interesting segue, and I'm going to ask you to assume a role, because you and I had another conversation on Twitter, not concerning the game at all, but actually concerning something that I did that I wanted to get some feedback on you from. Now, I've since taken that video not down, it's just privated. But the reason I wanted to reference it here is because I think you are an excellent example of someone that can give me some feedback from, and just because a lot of the point of this idea of an interview is because I like to give developers an opportunity to say their piece. I feel like indie developers, a lot of the time, they serve a lot of masters. And in serving a lot of masters, they don't really get a chance to voice their opinions all that much beyond, I think I've made a pretty good game and I'd appreciate if you'd go out and buy it.
Sure.
It's pretty much the only opinion they're allowed to express without being absolutely massacred. Whereas reviewers, or at least people that claim to be reviewers, they get to say anything under the sun about a game with almost no repercussion.
Yeah.
I did a video about a developer I thought had misbehaved, shall we say. Let's now use this opportunity to downplay it. And I remember having a conversation with you about it, and you said, I can see where you're coming from there, but I sensed some reticence at the time. Do you think the majority of the criticisms leveled against indie games, specifically developers and how they approach things in terms of that social media presence, because you referenced it, and that's why I wanted to segue into it, because to your point, it's a massive endeavour to not only be responsible for development of an entire game, from concept to realisation, but then also be the person responsible for priming the game for the public, for engaging with an audience that might not fully understand what it is that you've made, and you're trying to educate them on it without, seeming, dismissive or arrogant about the questions that they're asking. And then dealing with the reviews of how people have played the game and maybe not grasped the concept, or they've not been very good at it, and they've blamed you for that.
Right.
How do you feel in terms of the larger scope of game reviews, specifically anyone that's reviewed your game or given you feedback on the game? How fair do you think it's been? Do you think it's been reasonable, or do you look at it and go, you know what, man? I don't know if any of that's really fair. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, the streamers and reviewers that I've interacted with, most of them have been smaller indies as well, and I found generally the people I've interacted with have been great. I think as fellow indie creatives, they probably understand better than most the process that indie developers go through. And so my interactions when I've had interactions with them, have been very good. I guess the challenge, as the incident, I guess you were speaking to specifically, if I can remember, I think I was saying that from an indie developer, when you're searching for reviewers, because actually it's a challenge even to get your game reviewed, because a lot of reviewers say they're indie friendly, but they still have their own, of course, biases in
Of
terms of
course,
what they
yeah.
like to play. And so, as a developer, there are two things. One, you want to make sure your game is put in front of someone who ideally would take the time to review it fairly and actually take the time and play the game and
Of
review it,
course, yeah.
because a lot of developers, sorry, a lot of requests that developers get is just for people who want free games.
Of course, yeah.
So you there's a natural skepticism, I guess. Whereas I personally, I believe I think how we actually met is you requested a key and I actually checked out who you were. And I wanted to make sure that you were actually someone who had a channel and actually was putting effort into their channel. And I didn't want to just. I'm not the kind of person who was just going to send out 1,000 keys to someone, because I wanted to make sure that that you represented yourself as a creative. So I guess that was what I was getting to, where there's a lot of people out there who I think just take advantage of the process, and also just from a technical aspect. As an indie developer, I'm personally terrified of my game getting cracked, and there's a lot of just people that want access to your game so they can crack it too. So you have to, so that was where I was when you were mentioning some people you might not get to. I think what you're referencing is when you weren't getting the feedback from the developer that you wanted, that perhaps that developer hadn't put the time in to see that you were genuine,
Sure.
and was just assuming you were someone taking advantage of it.
Yeah, I mean, the full context of that situation is laid out in that video, and I will. It was a friend of mine that talked me into pulling it for the time being. He's a game reviewer and he's been in the game a lot longer than I'll ever be in the game. And he said, look, maybe on balance, I still stand by the bit. And the reason for that is because of people like you and a couple of other developers that I've met who are in a similar position, albeit almost to the disadvantage, because the developer in question actually had a team, a social media team responsible for the interactions. And they were so... just as a business, right? I mean, you again, you and I don't consider myself a businessman, but you do run a business because you're selling a game. So you are a businessman to a certain degree. So you are responsible for the way your business is perceived. You yourself have a reputation as a businessman. As obviously, again, a creator and an indie developer, but also a businessman. So you're going to take steps to try and maintain that reputation, be it through managing expectations by saying, look, I can't answer every query. I can't approve every game key request because of the reasons that you've laid out. At least then people understand the expectation. And they then, look, if they then get mad about their own expectations, that's kind of their fault.
Yeah.
In that situation, they'd laid out a set of expectations that weren't met, in my opinion. Now, later on, I reflected upon it and I went, well, maybe I was a bit vociferous in my criticism, but I stand by everything that I said in terms of its factual value. And you are an example of a developer who, to your point, you might have done your vetting previously, but then you were very generous with your time in answering my questions. You were generous enough to let me review the game, and then give me feedback on my feedback, which is always helpful, because I find sometimes that I do not have the skill level required to simply pick up and play any game possible. Sometimes I need just a little bit of a, hey, try this out, see if this works. And it works, and it goes, oh, great, now I'm having fun with the game. Excellent. And even if it's just a tweak in the philosophy, hence why I ask if there's been any criticism of the game that you received and you go, oh, wow, he didn't get it. Do you know what? I should really message him and say, hey, by the way, that thing you criticized, yeah, that's not true. That all you need to do is this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I've seen that in games where I've gone, hey, by the way, this doesn't work. And they go, oh, yeah, well, there's a reason for that. It's because of this reason. It's the way it's designed, and if you do this, it's absolutely fine. Okay, great.
Yeah. First of all, for the record, I think I pretty much agreed with your video as well. I was just trying to give I think your reaction was dead on. I think there is and I even reached out to you and said, I appreciate hearing this from your side, your perspective, because it actually helped me evaluate how I was responding to reviewers and review requests, and to make sure I wasn't getting jaded by the process, and that I was giving people who gave me their time, I was giving them my time back. I wanted to make sure that I was responding appropriately. So I actually appreciated your video very much, and I largely agreed with it. Um, but to your point, I've found generally, strangely, well, not I don't know if it's strange, but if people don't like a game, they just don't review it. I think rather than giving a bad review, they just don't review it at all. And so the people that there's another streamer that is in the process of reviewing the game as well, and he had some criticisms, and he actually I actually ended up doing a session with him where he played the game and kind of just gave his thoughts on it, which I found immensely valuable. So he was someone who took the time, and yeah, he had his criticisms, but he took the time to play the game, invest himself in the game, and then offer his genuine, honest feedback, and it helped me immensely. Just seeing him play, seeing what his challenges were, and a lot of his comments ended up changing elements of the game itself. So I don't have a problem with negative feedback at all, as long as it's genuine, honest, and thought out feedback. I think really honestly the challenge is just getting it out there to enough people who are willing to invest the time in it, good or bad,
Sure.
whatever the result is. But yeah, I mean, to your point, to your video, I largely agree with that. I think there's especially with indies or larger companies, they look and see, they have a little bit of I don't want to call it a snobbish air to them, but it's just is this person too small for me to even consider? And I'm as an indie myself, I certainly don't have that attitude. If you want to invest the time in me and my game and give me some feedback on it, awesome. I'm all for it. You're an indie creative, I'm an indie creative. Let's help each other. So that's kind of how I look at it. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that sentiment more. I mean, it is indicative of the indie market for me that's a sentiment that I see mirrored a lot of places, and it's weird when it isn't, because it is a thing of. It feels to me like all ships rise with the tide when it comes to the indie market.
Sure.
There's an element of competition for sure. I'm not going to say that developers wouldn't compete with each other for the audience that there is, but at the same time, reviewers and again, to your point, my experience, I've been largely blown away by the response that developers would get. I mean, again, take you as an example. I want to focus on you here. It's all about you. This is your moment. You've been extremely generous with your time and extremely detailed in your responses, and these are the things that I'll be incorporating into my review down the line, because I think it's important that gamers do, especially in the indie market, maybe not so on the larger games, because they kind of get lost in the shovel of hundreds of developers. But when it's such a personal experience for someone to craft this game, as you have, I think it's important you get to know the people behind it, because it goes some way into explaining the reason the game is the way what it is.
Yeah.
Again, to your point, I think the feedback I'd say suggest to you with respect to how you set out to create the game versus what is already out there, that's probably the way to go in terms of highlighting. Look, you might expect this from a card game. However, boy, have we got something in store for you, and then just going out there like that, because I've got to be honest with you. Again, I'm a complete novice when it comes to the genre.
Right.
And yeah, I struggled to even get the damn thing working originally, but that's because I'm an idiot. Not any fault of the game itself. I have a lot of problems with games when I first boot them up, because they all have their own weird ways of approaching things. And that's again, that's something that you learn with time to go, okay, let me try this. Let me try this. When you get into the game, it's a bunch of I can't tell you how much I enjoyed playing it. Even if at times I had no idea what I was doing. But that's because, look, I learned through trial and error. That's just me as a person. And I don't know how many of the gamers or members of the audience would be in that sense. Some, to your point, some would prefer, look, no, give me the instructions so I can understand what I'm doing before I play.
Yep.
Whereas I'm completely the opposite. I'm going, no, let me play the damn thing. Let me figure it out for myself what works and what doesn't. And I'll build my own philosophy and tactics that way. Your game allowed me to do that. because I think that even though it's got the tutorial where it needs it so for people that haven't played the game so far, as the game progresses, you have stages where you can click to progress each stage or phase, as the game phrases it.
Right.
But it offers prompts as you go. It says, "Oh, by the way, if you want to maybe look at this, you want to look at this." It's helpful, but it's not invasive.
Right.
And I think in a game like this, that would have been the temptation. Again, coming back to what we were saying earlier, the temptation might have been there to be maybe a bit too evasive and say, "Hey, by the way, you've taken a bit of time there. Do you want to maybe click on this one instead?"
Yeah.
Well, no, I'm just thinking about my next move. Okay, well, if you want to click on this one, this is what it. Do you know what I mean? That could be overbearing after a time.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, and actually, that's still. It's funny you say that because a tutorial is still definitely on the table. I haven't removed it. The slides are in there currently, talking about features and such. And I think we've had this discussion before, where a tutorial is it just takes so much resources just from time and money and everything else, because let's face it, when you're indie, time is money. And then if it's largely ignored, or it just becomes annoying that the player doesn't want to deal with it, it's just resources wasted that could have been put somewhere else. So it's interesting to hear your perspective on it, because it is something I'm still deciding whether I want to, or how I want to approach it in terms of that new player experience. And because while you while you say you've enjoyed learning yourself all the strategies, I'm not sure. There's certainly a core of the player base that wants to know how a game works before they play it. So how do you best service that? Or should you service that? Like you said, maybe you should just make the game you want to make, and the audience will find it. I don't know. It's interesting. It's an interesting thought process in terms of how to approach development, for sure.
It's tricky. I mean, again, because I always approach it from my perspective as a content creator. I have to structure my videos in a way that makes sense to me, and then hopefully leave enough information along the way that it makes sense to the audience. That doesn't always work.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you have to then ask yourself, right, well, how much are you willing to compromise your original vision for the sake of the audience's participation? Not enjoyment. I think that you never have to sacrifice anything if the product is good enough. If your game is good enough, and I certainly think it is, the enjoyment's always going to come. But it's a question of how much do you want to service that need to get good as quickly as possible, where people think that's where the fun is, if that's where you think your audience is going to find the fun in the game, rather than the exploration of the different cards in the decks, the different strategies, the way the progression was. Again, to your point, the way that the dragons evolve during the course of the game, I remember being really, really excited to see what the next one was going to be once I figured out, oh, wait, so let's see what the next one is. There's another one. Oh, I got to see what the next one is. And
that's awesome. That's exactly the reaction I wanted.
Well,
so that's awesome to hear.
I think that taps into, again, my generation, because I'm probably a little bit younger than you, but still in that Pokemon phase where, with all due respect to anyone else in the world, if you did not live a childhood where you were more excited by a little theme tune, a little weird pixelated being flashing back and forth between another pixelated being, and then a big da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da, you didn't have a childhood as far as I'm concerned. And that same sensation is in your game, in the sense of you always kind of want to see what the next one is and what new ability it's going to yield and how the combat's going to progress from there, and also the fact that it's almost a race because the other player has the same ability, and there's almost this cat and mouse game of do I want to sacrifice this and play this and then progress? It's to say it's got a pace to it would probably be the wrong word to use, but I certainly felt a need to always be moving the game onwards rather than scratching my chin and putting a card and then putting it down and giving another card and then putting it down. It was more like, right, where are we going from here? What's the next one? Let's do this. It certainly has an ebb and flow to it that I didn't anticipate when I picked up the game for the first time. And that's one of the things that made me really enjoy it, was seeing that sense of progression within the dragons. That was really cool.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. Yeah, there's definitely more options than you have time for, and that's intentional. There's kind of that internal clock in the game, and that's partially, with the AI too, programming that into it, so that where a player has to make those choices. And hopefully, I'm glad that was intentional, that you kind of feel that internal clock. If you feel that pacing, so that's good to hear that came across actually.
Well, again, the reason
For
why
you.
that struck me is because I've played other games where, I mean, platformers. I mean, I don't think it's controversial to say they're a dime a dozen. I would
Yeah.
imagine if you put DragonClash into Steam right now, it's going to be nestled in amongst a bunch of platformers that have similar sounding names because there's so many of the damn things.
Right.
And even though platformers, generally speaking, are action oriented or they have a degree of, they might have a timer or whatever. I've played a million platformers where there's no urgency to it.
Sure.
Your game has urgency or a sense of agency to it, I should say, that I wasn't expecting. And
Yeah.
that, again, adds to the enjoyment factor for me because it's not just about, oh, well, I'm running out of time, I better do this. It's almost, I kind of want to see what happens next. I want to see
Yeah.
how this progresses. And that's such a wonderful thing to see because, again, that comes out in the passion that's been put into it. At least that's my take on it. I mean, I've played enough games to see where there's passion invested in a product and where there isn't. In yours, it's plain to see.
Yeah. It's great to hear. I appreciate the kind words. For sure. Yeah. I mean,
Let's
that
just dwell
was.
on how good your game is for a second. There we go. Lovely. I'm glad we shared that moment. But no, but I don't. I don't like blowing smoke. But again, it's why I was really excited to talk to you about how you perceive your game and what it took to make because it's lovely. Put it this way. I studied art in school. I never got to speak to an artist who made the picture because most of them have been dead for a couple of 100 years.
Right.
It's
Right.
interesting getting to speak to someone who has put together something that I would consider to be, at the very least, a very, very impressively put together product. At the best, a work of art. Because
Yeah.
it's a creative. Because it's a creative vision executed with code. That's the only
Yeah.
difference.
Yeah, that's true.
It's no less complex to put together. There are no fewer layers. There's no less inspiration that goes into making a latent inspired thought that goes into. Wouldn't it be great if this was a thing? I should be the person that makes this a thing.
Sure.
Same sort of exactly the same philosophies go into making art as do into games, as far as I'm concerned. So speaking to, I wouldn't call you an artist. I wouldn't want to put you in that. I wouldn't want to put that hat on you as well. But certainly
Right.
someone that has a passion for the genre and a passion for his product, it's a pleasure. It's a privilege.
Well, that's yeah. I mean, I think. Well, it's great to hear you say that, and it's great that it's that kind of had that kind of impact on you, and as I think we all are all artists in a way, in that we as a creative, whatever you put out there is an extension of yourself. So it's it's always a pleasure to hear that someone's enjoying what you put out there, and that it resonates with them in some way. So yeah, it's great.
As far as the wider spectrum of games that you've got your eyes on maybe making next after this, because I imagine this isn't the end of the road for you as far as indie development is concerned, or are you focusing more on other projects after Dragon
No,
Clash? Where you want to...
jeez. I think you always have what you work whatever you're working on. I think that's the challenge. Is actually half the time it's just finishing because you have so many other things you want to do, and you're like do I want to continue grinding with this code, with this feature, with this art, integrating this new thing, and then testing it and squashing the bugs with it, or do I want to do this other glitzy fun thing that's kind of in the background saying hey play with me. So yeah, there I have whenever you have and that's the same thing with writing too, I guess. Whenever you have one project, there's always a dozen other ones you you kind of want to do too. And there's only so many hours in the day, right? But
100%.
yeah. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely more things I would like to do. Whether it be a computer game or a tabletop game, I haven't decided what platform it would be on necessarily. But yeah, there's certainly hope this is not the end of the road for me.
It's interesting to hear the philosophy after putting together a game because I think that I don't know about you, but when I come to the end of a project, there's two minds. There's always the excitement of what to do next, but there's also that little bit of me that wants to sit back and just let it play out for a little. Just let me enjoy what I made for a second because I put a lot of effort into this, so I kind of want to enjoy people's enjoyment of it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, heck, that's where I am now. I think I mentioned at the beginning of the call that I'm kind of in that period of inhale, exhale, and I feel
Yes.
like that after every content update. Where okay, the brown mauler is released. Let me just sit back and let him let him settle in, see how people react to him. Let me play around with the game, my own game. Let me play it a little bit and try to find some enjoyment with it. Because as a creator, sometimes it's even hard to play your own stuff sometimes because you're so critical of it. Um, but yeah, there's definitely. I think even when you're building something, you go through that because heck, if you don't, you're never going to finish. If it's just torture the whole time, why, I don't think you're going to ever bother putting in those agonizing hours to finish it. So I think you have to find some periods where you can just sit back and enjoy it, and certainly afterwards, I'd hope that's the case too. Um, yeah,
Yeah. I mean, the only other thing I really wanted to ask you today,
yeah.
War Spider Entertainment. Where does the name War Spider come from? What was the inspiration behind the name?
Yeah, I know. Especially in this day and age, it has some. There's no nefarious meaning to it by any means. It's the literal translation of my name. Mark is Mars, the god of war, Roman god of war, and Arana is Aranha in Portuguese is spider. So it's literally War Spider is literally Marc Aranha.
Do you know what? Just a quick. I wanted that to sound like a really deep, introspective question. The
Yeah.
real answer is you told me that in one of our previous conversations,
Oh,
and
did
I
I?
just wanted to bring it up because it was fucking cool as hell. And I was like, oh, I have to remember that. That's really cool. But yeah, no, War Spider Entertainment, it's there. The warspider.com is the website. It's got your various projects listed there, including DragonClash, which is
Yep.
available right now at all good Steam and various other outlets as well.
Yep.
I don't know. Is there anything else you'd want to talk about as far as the game itself is concerned, in terms of some of the gameplay sessions that you've had, or any interesting interactions as a result of the game? Would you say?
Well, I mean, I guess just to kind of put a bow on what you just said. That just for anyone who might be checking out the game, that it is still in early access. That it's definitely at a point where if you jump in, I'm definitely open to feedback. You can have an active hand in molding the game with your feedback, and it's already happened from people who have played the game. As I mentioned, I've got a number of comments from yourself and from others who have helped shape even small things that help strengthen the game as a whole. But also that it's not content complete yet. The next content update will add at least 3, probably more boss fights to it, and so there'll be a progression system to the boss fights you play. So it's not just you hunting the same 4 AI dragons. But yeah, so definitely hop in and to anyone who's considering it, and make your voice heard and enjoy. Hopefully,
I'll add one tiny little caveat. Be gentle, fuckers. It's early access, all right. Give the guy a little bit of breathing space and a little bit of understanding as to how hard it is to put one of these goddamn things together. It's not easy.
thank you, sir.
So I have to add that in. I feel, again, no offense to cast dispersions or generalizations. Every developer has always approached things in a certain very nice way. I always feel the need to kind of go, yeah, let me translate for you in real speak. I'm going to be
Yes.
real with you for a second, okay? And then just kind of just let it loose. And there's always okay, just gently now. Just potential customers you're talking to here. So yeah,
Right.
I mirror that sentiment entirely, because again, my impressions of the game will be fleshed out in what is probably going to be a review that's going to last from now until the end of the year, because that's how long my reviews are. I don't know if you had the chance to check out any of my reviews in their entirety.
Oh, yeah.
Probably not, because otherwise you'd be still watching one. But I will flesh them out. I mean, my impressions of the game, again, in a nutshell, are it's incredibly well put together, a top quality product, just bare minimum. Okay, the design work in the game, the way it's been put together ergonomically and aesthetically is absolutely beautiful. The gameplay itself, again, is dynamic. It has a pace to it. It has urgency to it. It has development. It has tactics. But you can play it if you're a knucklehead like me as well. It's a beautiful game. It's really, really impressive, and I'm so happy that I got a chance to play it, and I'm going to be even happier once I've had a chance to fully review it. I hope at some stage, seeing as you offered, you and I can have a game. My only caveat to that is be gentle, like we were just saying a moment ago. Just maybe let me win a game or two occasionally.
Well, hey, I offered to be your I could be your ringer. I could give you some advice as you play, and you could help you win your first game, as you say.
I
So
like that idea. I like
that
that
offer is
idea.
out there. But hey, thank you so much for putting for your to you for putting the time and investment that you have so far into the game, and frankly, just for reaching out to me and putting this interview together. It's been great talking to you.
It's been a pleasure. I mean, before we wrap it up, I just want to do the thing that all good interviewers slash podcast hosts do, and
Yeah.
plug all my stuff. So all of my stuff is no, I'm just joking. As far as your stuff, I mean, where can people find you? Where can people find the game? Where can people find your other products? Again, you've got a book that you previously did. You've got the card games. You've got the games. Where can people find everything?
Well, I mean, in terms of DragonClash, DragonClash.com. I think it's at DragonClash Game on Twitter and Facebook. And just search for DragonClash on Steam. I'm there as well. There's also links on the website. In terms of other stuff I've done, I guess the best way, like you said, WarSpiderEntertainment.com. I've got a couple other card games out, and a couple books as well. Yeah. So yeah, I'm kind of all over the place. I enjoy the creative process. So.
I mean, yeah. I mean, putting links to everything in the description below. By the way, so the Twitter handle, the website, the Steam page, and a bunch of other places. Just as a final little cherry on this cake, go. I know I've not done a review, and you're not supposed to do this before you do the review. Go and check out the game. It's really, it's a bunch of. Look, let me just sum it up. It's a bunch of fun. I will cry over this game later. For now, go and check out the game. It's tons of fun. You won't regret it. I promise you, it's a really fun little game, and I'm really happy I've got a chance to play it, and I want to say thank you so much for letting me have the opportunity to have this conversation with you, Mark. It's been a pleasure, and also having a chance to play your game, also a pleasure. And I guess this is the part where I'm supposed to be professional. So
Awesome. Oh, thank you so much.
yeah, this is the thing. So thank you very much for listening to this edition of the Halcyon show. Please like, share, and subscribe. Check out the other content below, but most importantly, go and check out DragonClash, fuckers. Go do it now.
Perfect.
Right, I'm going to stop the recording there.